My brother generously offered us the chance to live at his place without the burden of rent or utilities, and we're relying on you, Amber, to take care of everything. I'm employed in the finance sector, and my husband, let's call him Michael, repairs cars. We currently reside in the house where I was raised, which is no longer occupied by my parents, but now functions as a family-run business, previously managed by my father. My brother, who was groomed to succeed my dad, pursued economics in college. He further honed his skills by studying business management at Oxford University abroad. After returning to the USA, he collaborated with our father for some time. Eventually, when our parents decided to retire to Snowmass Village for a tranquil life amidst nature, my brother took the reins of the family business. Subsequently, the family home was passed down to me. My husband and I moved in, appreciating its excellent location, just an 8-minute walk from the train station and conveniently close to public transport, making access to shops, hospitals, and schools effortless. It's reassuring to know that everything we need is within reach as our children grow up and start their own lives. We were excited about expanding our family and enjoying life here, but unexpected challenges arose soon after moving in. My mother-in-law frequently visits, driven by curiosity about my parents' business and its worth. Her inquiries often tread into uncomfortable territory, like asking, "Hey Amber, what's the deal with your parents' money? How much will you inherit?" I find these questions distasteful and try to deflect them with a laugh, saying, "I'm not sure. I haven't given it much thought. I already own the house, so there might not be much else." Despite my attempts to lighten the mood, she persists, ominously hinting, "They're getting older. You never know what might happen." My mother-in-law seemed overly focused on my parents' financial status, almost as if she were counting on inheriting their wealth herself. Even though I was aware of what I might inherit, I chose to keep it to myself, not wanting to divulge any details to her or even my husband, who is quite close to her. However, one surprising holiday morning at about 7 a.m., our day took an unexpected turn. The doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, a group of movers greeted me. To my shock, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family had decided to move in without any prior notice. They entered our home with broad smiles, cheerfully announcing that they were moving in. Their overly bright enthusiasm sent shivers down my spine. Turning to my husband for some sort of explanation, he simply shrugged and dismissively said, "What's the big deal? Mom and the others can stay here. We've got plenty of space." He seemed unfazed by the sudden intrusion. I was still reeling from the surprise of this new living arrangement when my sister-in-law casually dropped a bombshell. She claimed that our brother had invited them and that they wouldn't need to worry about rent or bills. At that point, my brother-in-law started picking out rooms as if he were at a hotel, even instructing Michael to move our things into the hallway to make space. The situation rapidly became overwhelming, and it felt as though they were claiming my house as their own, taking over rooms without hesitation. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family had been pushing boundaries for quite some time, with my sister-in-law even going through my personal belongings without permission. It seemed they might even try to claim my room next. I had reached my breaking point. This is my home, and their behavior made it seem as if they had ownership over it. I'm usually calm and collected, but watching these people treat my family home, left to me by my parents, as if it were their property was too much. That's why I finally raised my voice, firmly telling them it was time for everyone to leave. The invasion of my personal space and the blatant disrespect for my sanctuary pushed me to act out of character and demand they respect my home. But then something totally unexpected happened. "How dare you speak to us like that? You're the one who needs to leave." With those words still hanging in the air, I felt a sharp sting on my cheek. Had I really just been slapped? It took a moment for the reality to sink in as I stood there, stunned, feeling the throbbing pain. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't tolerate living with people who showed such blatant disrespect. This house was mine, and I wouldn't let anyone treat it like their personal playground. I quickly decided to leave, packing my things and preparing to inform my family about what had transpired. Needing some space and a fresh start, I rented an apartment further from work, even though it meant a longer commute. When I called my parents to explain the situation, I could hear the anger in their voices, especially my dad's. He had always been a pillar of support, both as a CEO and as a father. Although I didn't want to involve my soon-to-retire parents in this turmoil, I felt I had no other choice. My right to my inherited home was being challenged, and I needed to take a stand. While settling into the new apartment, I was certain that my husband and his family were making themselves comfortable back at my house. Driven by advice from my brother and father, I decided to take decisive action. A few days later, during a work break, I checked my phone to find it flooded with missed calls and messages from my husband. His response to the latest developments was clear. I had made arrangements to have the water and electricity cut off at the house. Since everything there depended on electricity, this move was sure to get their attention and underscore the seriousness of the situation. I was determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine and remind everyone that there were consequences to their actions. We hadn't gotten around to installing solar panels yet, and without electricity, dealing with the heat must have been quite a struggle. My husband's repeated calls were likely about this very predicament. As I was contemplating ignoring another call, he rang again, this time perfectly timed during my break. "Hey, what's happening?" "There's no electricity and the water's not running." "Did you turn off the utilities?" His voice was tinged with panic. Given that the house was in my name and I was no longer residing there, I felt it made sense to cut off the utilities. Why should I foot the bill for a house I wasn't living in? So yes, I had the utilities shut off. My husband, however, was furious, demanding that I restore the services immediately. But just because he wanted the utilities back didn't mean I would comply. If they wanted utilities, they should manage that with their own finances, especially since they often reminded me that it was my house, implying that I should bear the costs. Their words didn't match their actions, and I felt no obligation to renew the contracts or pay for their comfort. Firm in my decision, I ended the call as my break wrapped up. Soon after, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law each called me separately, all voicing their complaints about the lack of electricity and water. They lamented over how unbearably hot and uncomfortable their rooms were, and how inconvenient life was without running water. Their grievances only reinforced my resolve not to cave to their demands. I maintained my stance that if they were unhappy, they were welcome to leave the house. But those were their problems, not mine. After listening to their complaints, I firmly told them to sort out the issues themselves and ended the calls. I thought they were just being greedy and expected that they would give up and leave soon. However, even after a week, there were no signs of them moving out. Realizing they might stay indefinitely, I decided to escalate the situation. I sought advice from my father's company lawyer and requested that he draft a notice for my husband and the others. The notice accused them of trespassing. They had entered my property without permission, effectively forcing me out, and now occupied it as if it were their own. I warned all four of them that I was considering legal action. The notion of receiving a lawyer's letter took my husband aback. Clearly unprepared for such a firm response from me, he approached me hoping to negotiate a compromise. I understood that their reputation was important to them and that the threat of a lawsuit would be daunting. They wanted to avoid legal issues, but also didn't want to abandon their comfortable setup, likely hoping to persuade me to let them stay. I could see right through my husband's intentions, but despite this, I refused to entertain their pleas. My refusal pushed my husband to the edge. In the heat of a workday, He lost his temper and shouted at me over the phone, demanding that I retract the lawyer's notice and back down. His outburst, however, did not sway me. In fact, it only served to irritate me further. I thought to myself, who do you think you are, taking over someone else's house? No matter how loudly he protested, my mind was made up. If they insisted on squatting there, I was ready to take legal action. Think carefully before you act, I warned him, but despite his continued yelling, I paid him no attention and hung up the phone. Engaging further seemed like a waste of time. After discussing the possibility of divorce with my lawyer, I returned home to find missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. I suspected they wanted to talk about settling the dispute, but I was done with confrontations and decided to block their numbers to stop the calls. This act of drawing clear boundaries seemed to underscore the seriousness of the situation for my husband's family. Unable to face the looming legal actions, they eventually packed up and left the house. With the involvement of the lawyer, my divorce proceedings moved forward smoothly. I hired a cleaning service to rejuvenate the house, and once they were done, I was finally able to enjoy the comfort of being back in my freshly tidied home. Living apart from my husband's family in a rented apartment was manageable, but it was nothing compared to the serenity of being in my own space. Even though the house showed signs of wear, I was planning a renovation soon. My dad recommended a reliable contractor for the job. Being on my own felt surprisingly liberating. I could lounge on the couch without being judged and eat whatever I wanted without criticism. Just as I was settling into this newfound independence, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I ignored it, thinking it might be the contractor, but the persistent ringing eventually compelled me to answer. It was my ex-husband, whom I had not spoken to since our separation 5 months ago. The sound of his voice immediately dampened my mood. After finalizing our divorce and agreeing to cease all contact through legal channels, I was puzzled by his call, especially since he had changed his number. Before I could end the call, he interjected with a plea. "Please, just listen for a moment. I'm desperate." Reluctantly, I stayed on the line. He then shared that his company was undergoing financial difficulties, resulting in a potential pay cut. Moreover, his mother's health was declining, rendering her unable to work. To compound the situation, my sister-in-law and her husband were struggling financially, with him being unemployed. My sister-in-law was juggling multiple part-time jobs just to make ends meet, with most of her income going toward paying off her husband's debts. Meanwhile, my ex-husband explained that he was facing a pay cut, making their financial situation even more precarious. As they shared their difficulties, all I could respond with was a detached, "Okay, I see." These were the same people who had invaded my home, ignored my rights, and tried to force me out. It was hard to feel any sympathy for them. Their problems were their own. My ex-husband's desperation grew as he pleaded, "Please, don't turn your back on us. We're on the brink here. We might not have a roof over our heads or food on the table tomorrow. Remember, we used to be family. Can't you help us?" His voice cracked, verging on tears. But I remained unmoved. During my difficult times, he had offered no support and had sided with my mother-in-law, who had constantly belittled me. Just like her, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law had looked down on me, mocking my appearance and traditional values, dismissing me as old-fashioned. Their insults had cut deep, and they showed no remorse. Furthermore, my mother-in-law had worsened matters by pressuring me to conceive, subjecting me to strange remedies, scheduling unnecessary doctor's visits, and spreading rumors about my supposed infertility. Reflecting on my marriage, I saw no redeeming qualities. My ex-husband, once caring, had become a puppet under his mother's control. After we married, there was an incident where my mother-in-law barged into our home while I was out for an appointment. She expressed disappointment to my ex-husband, saying, "I wanted to see Amber, but she wasn't here. I want us to be friends, but I'm saddened." Upon hearing his mother's distress, my ex-husband lashed out at me without even considering my side of the story, influenced by her claims of wanting to get along. This history made it clear that engaging further would only draw me back into their chaos, something I had worked hard to escape. My mother-in-law's criticism was relentless. "Has my son lost weight because your cooking is so terrible?" she would say, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, whether we were at home or out in public. Together with my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, they formed a united front against me, eliminating any chance for a peaceful relationship. I realized I could no longer tolerate their behavior. "No matter what you say, my decision is final. I can't help you," I declared firmly during the call. "I'm ending this call now, and I don't want to hear from you again." With that, I hung up and immediately blocked the new number. Knowing my ex-husband, he might try to change his number to contact me again, so I made plans to change my number over the weekend. However, before I could make the change, they blatantly violated the lawyer's agreement. At 10 p.m., they showed up at my door, demanding entry and assistance. "Open the door. We're family. You should take care of us," they shouted, banging loudly and causing a disturbance late at night. "What's going on at this hour?" "Please go home. You're disturbing the neighbors," I pleaded through the intercom. But they ignored me, continuing to create a ruckus. Feeling overwhelmed by their unruly behavior, I was contemplating calling the police when suddenly, sirens blared from outside. It appeared a neighbor had already alerted the authorities. Startled by the approaching police, my ex-husband's family assumed I had made the call and tried to flee, but they were quickly encircled by onlookers, leaving them with no escape route. Soon, the officers arrived and escorted them to the police station. I provided a detailed account of the incident when questioned by the police. Word of the disturbance spread quickly through the neighborhood, reaching a colleague of my ex-husband who was among the spectators. By the next day, the whole office was abuzz with the story. Already dealing with the repercussions of a pay cut, my ex-husband's troubles multiplied when his company learned of his involvement in the police incident. He lost his job and couldn't afford his rent, leading to strained relations with his sister's family and the collapse of their shared living arrangement. Now, Michael and his mother were compelled to relocate to public housing, where both of them took on several part-time jobs to make ends meet. In a desperate effort to add to their income, his mother also entered the part-time workforce.